Dream Theater is always compared to progressive rock bands and stuff like that, and that's some of my favorite music of all time, but also classic rock. I mean, actually, the other Dream Theater guys listen to prog rock bands like Genesis, Yes, Pink Floyd, but they don't really listen to classic rock like I do, like the Beatles and Zeppelin and Cream and Hendrix and the Doors and Procol Harum. That was a big part of my childhood. And then the other Dream Theater guys don't really listen to the more obscure metal stuff like I grew up on. I mean, the classic metal stuff like Priest and Old Maiden and Old Scorpions and Accept, like we were talking about, but also the thrash scene. So that's my background, is kind of that.
Yeah, you know, for me it's basically the same. You know, heavy metal in Sweden was massive in you know the early '80s. You know, and I listened to all those bands. You know, like Maiden, Sabbath, Priest. You know, I love guitar players, so I was very much into the Scorpions, Matthias Jabs and Uli Roth and all those guys, Michael Schenker, Yngwie Malmsteen later on. I love him. And basically it was like evolution, you know. You start with whatever classic rock from the 70s, and then the heavy metal bands of the 80s, and then go into thrash and speed metal, and somebody played you, you know, like Bathory or something. You know, I got into death metal, black metal, and that's basically when I started a band, you know, in the late 80s. And then I was very late with the kind of prog rock, you know. So I didn't get into that until maybe early 90s, you know. And at the time it was basically just, you know, I always had like a Venom shirt on, or like Possessed, you know, that kind of thing. And then got into the whole prog thing and started collecting records and just got, you know, fell in love with all that style of music. And I guess that's why I liked you so much the first time I heard, you know, because it was like a combination of everything I've been listening to up to that point.
That was, I mean, that's just a natural, it just naturally falls out of us. I mean, me especially listening to all that kind of stuff. I mean, I could talk, I've never hid my influences. I'm
no, me neither.
Always a huge music fan. I love talking about the music I grew up listening to. But I'm not afraid for it to come out in Dream Theater's music either. To me, Dream Theater was just trying to take all of that stuff and throw it into a melting pot, you know?
Yeah, that's like, it makes sense, you know, like being a musician, you know, it's kind of, sometimes I get like surprised with people who are so afraid to kind of play the music that they like to play, you know, which, you know, I think it's the same for you guys as it is for us, you know, anything that we come up with, even though it might sound like nothing like we've done before, you know, that's, you know, it's cool as long as it's good, you know, so that's, I think we have, I guess both of us have a lot, you know, thank our whatever influence the bands that we grew up with, you know.
I mean, I think that's a sign of a good progressive band. I mean, progressive doesn't have to mean over technical or long songs. I think one of the elements of a progressive band is that diversity. And I think most of Dream Theater's audience and Opeth's audience are open-minded listeners that like Sabbath just as much as they like Pink Floyd. You know, I think a lot of our audience are those type of people.
Yeah, I think that's what like progressive, like the term progressive rock, when it kind of, they started using that like in the late 60s or whatever, it was because the bands were blending blues, jazz and rock, and, you know, whatever, you know, and just putting everything into their songs, you know, which I guess that's why they label it that way.
I mean, if you look at like King Crimson, I mean, that's what they were doing. It was psychedelic music, it was blues, it was
it's
jazz.
It's like a jazz band, you know, you know, it's like almost like some songs, it's a jazz song, you know.
So people just called that style progressive, which is basically just everything. And I think that's what Dream Theater and Opeth and so many other of these bands today that have that progressive label, you know, they don't have to sound like Yes or Genesis to be a progressive band. I think a lot of progressive bands are just as influenced by maybe Motorhead or the Ramones. I mean, I love the Ramones and the Sex Pistols, and that has nothing to do with progressive.
You don't need to be like, you know, just because we're a progressive band that we can't appreciate the Misfits or something, you know.
Totally.
But I think with Dream Theater, you know, I think you must have been one of the like pioneers for kind of the progressive metal type of tag, you know.
I think maybe we were just the first to get lucky to get the acceptance or recognition. Because I think before us, you know, Fate's Warning was doing it before us, and Watchtower, and even like Halloween or like Merciful Fate. Merciful Fate was doing like all these time changes and everything, and Queensryche, and even Metallica, early Metallica albums had long songs.
Justice for All.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, Dream Theater kind of somehow became the poster boy for this progressive metal sound, but there were certainly many I
think, you know, like Maiden was also like in the early days. I know for a fact that like Steve Harris is a big fan of Underground Generator and bands like that.
Jethro Tull, I know.
They did covers.
Yeah, they did Cross-Eyed Mary, and they were doing long songs.
They did the Nectar cover, King of Twilight.
Oh yeah.